Now, the title is basically Academic Learning Strategies for Success, but in particular today, the main focus is how can I improve my note-taking skills? Now, I don't think I'm going to offer any magic bullets. As Jessica did suggest, I will give you some tips. And it may well be that just about everything I say you know. A lot of it is common sense. But I hope some of the things I say might be helpful, and maybe even one or two things might be new. Now I'm going to suggest to you that academic success has got 4 components. The first one is preparing to study. However, the main thing highlighted in bold here is obtaining the information, and this is where note-taking is going to come in. That is going to be the main point today. The other 2 things, exam preparation and writing the exam, are things that come closer to the end of the semester, or perhaps when you're coming up to midterms. And in fact, I did give a seminar on that last November, and it's available on Jessica Tube. Here to look that up. Environment. Another tip, tip number 3. Arrange a distraction-free environment. Now, when you're reading a text, you should be in a distraction-free environment. It should be a place that's quiet. You should have a good table or a chair. You should have comfortable but not too comfortable. Lying on a bed, sitting on a couch, not a good idea. You should have good light so that you can see, and it should be distraction-free in that, shall we suggest, you have to turn other things off. So turn your cell phone off, turn the television off. You might like to have music in the background. You may be a person who needs a little bit of arousal. That's fine. You know yourself better than anyone. But you don't want to be interrupted. So there are 2 tips. Tip 1, take the time that is required. That's what I'm saying. Number 2, record a plan, monthly, weekly, and daily. You should have a diary of some kind for the semester. You divide it into months, you divide it into weeks, you divide it into days, you divide it into hours within the day. You should, at the beginning of the semester, be completing that diary with a plan. So I've got 2 parts to my presentation: note-taking from texts on the one hand, and note-taking from lectures on the other hand. I don't need to take notes. The vicious cruelty of your words has branded them into my mind forever. That might be Jessica, of course, in the classroom. There might be 1 or 2 other stars at Bishops who have this ability to kind of just freeze you to the spot because of the wonder of their words. But most of us are pretty kind of run-of-the-mill, I won't say boring lecturers, but perhaps less than exciting. The funny thing is about this cartoon, none of them look particularly happy about it, which is a bit strange because it's supposed to be a good thing. Anyway, it's a cartoon, so what do you expect? So why do you take text notes? I'm about to justify why you do it here. I'm going to give you 3 reasons, and then within each of the 3 reasons, some sub-reasons. The first thing is active learning. If you take notes, it helps you to concentrate on what is being said, because in order to write something down, you really have to be listening. Now, we're actually talking about textbooks here, so let's do that first. When you're reading, you have to pay attention because you know you're going to write it down. And by taking notes, it helps you to concentrate carefully on the reading. Writing down ideas helps you to understand them. I've often found, as I write something down, it cements itself in my mind in a way that I get a deeper understanding of it. In fact, it's often not mentioned, but I think that one reason is simply the fact that it's taking you time to write. If you just read and read and read quickly, you may miss things. But if you read and then you're going to pause to write something down, just the act of taking the time, even if you weren't writing it, if you were just closing your eyes and say, what did that say? It would be time. The other thing is you should be taking notes in your own words, because it helps you to understand if you translate something from somebody else's words into your own. In fact, an old test of how well you understand something is how well you can explain it to somebody else. Have you ever noticed that? Somebody asks you about something, you maybe never tried to explain it before. As you start explaining it, you realize, oh, I don't really understand. But then when you have explained it, you say, now I do. And that's why professors look so good. They spend so much time yapping about what they think they know that they end up knowing it. By virtue of trying to explain. I notice sometimes I look at my lecture notes before class and I say, I'm going to talk about this, and I look at it and say, wait a minute, what's that exactly? I don't really get that. If I'm going to say it, I better just turn my mind over that a few more times, and then I say, oh yes, I see. And then when I give it, I know I get it in my own head. There's a better chance that it might be communicated well. Critical attitude. When you write slowly and take notes, because there's time, things will spontaneously pop into your mind. Questions may come into your mind, or alternative ways of looking at what you're reading. You may just find yourself being critical, and then you should take note of these critical ideas. You should say, oh yeah, but I think, and jot it down. Creative, critical things are more likely to happen if you're taking the time to write the notes. And actually it's a practice trial for learning, because later if you have an exam, you're actually practicing the material. Because reading is one thing, writing is two things, two is better than one. What about test preparation? This is not a class on exam prep, but my argument for taking notes is that it helps you for test preparation. First of all, it reduces the amount to be studied, because 20 pages of text can perhaps be reduced to 3 pages of notes. So later when you revise, you don't read the text again, you read your notes. And if they're good notes, you see, it doesn't take very long to read 3 pages. Distillation is what I'm talking about here. The idea is that you can reduce things down to a more manageable amount. Also, if you've written the ideas in your own words, as I've suggested, this is going to help you when you have to write exams, because your understanding will be deepened. The third thing is that reviewing alerts you to gaps in your knowledge. Sometimes when you read a text and you write down the notes, and then you look at the notes and you read them, you say, well, that's not quite clear. It's like me in my lecture. No, I thought I had it straight. I read my lecture note before class, and I don't realize what it really means. So I have to think about it again. You will discover gaps in your knowledge when you review your notes. Your notes may not be adequate, or they may not have captured exactly what's going on. And when you read what you've written, you realize, I have to sharpen that up. Also, organization helps. When you write your notes and you organize your notes, it actually helps you to anticipate possible test questions. Because when you organize something, it means putting it into a structure. And already, although you're not doing it consciously, you are actually anticipating possible questions. In fact, I would add something in here, that when you take notes from texts, and let's say the professor says you're supposed to know this, you should be saying, I wonder what they might ask me about that. And it's another way of deepening your understanding and using your notes effectively. It doesn't mean that what you come up with a question will be on the exam, but just the act of doing this will force you to think about the material. And of course, you never know. The magic question that you thought of yourself might actually come up in the exam. And then you feel really clever, because you say, my goodness, I anticipated what the professor was going to ask. And of course, when it happens, you say yes, and you write it, because you know the answer, because you made up the question. There's one professor who no longer teaches at Bishops. I think you would have loved him. Final exam, one question. Make up your own question and answer it.
Wow.
Wow. Sounds great. Of course, he always claimed that he judged the question as well as the answer. So you better ask a good question. It's not as easy as it sounds, but actually interesting. An interesting idea. The third thing is essay preparation. I'm just going to be brief here. You don't just take notes for exams, you also take notes from books when you're writing essays or writing projects. The slight difference here is that when you're writing a paper or an essay, you probably have a question in mind. When you're reading a book for a course, your mind isn't really set on any track, not too much, you're just reading to learn. But here you already have an idea of what you want to know, so if you have questions in your mind, you read with the question in your mind in order to write your essay. And so taking notes helps you to do that. Also, again, it may prompt new ideas, and of course if you're writing an essay, that's what you want, because essays usually involve a bit of you as well as a bit of somebody else. And thirdly, taking notes in your own words will prevent inadvertent plagiarism on essays. Don't write down what the text says in the textbook author's words, write them into your own words. Then later, let's say you're accused of plagiarism, you say, well, I was just taking notes and somehow they appeared in the essay, and the professor might not appreciate that as a defense, even though you weren't deliberately plagiarizing. So if you put your notes in your own words, you can never be accused of plagiarism because you're not using the other person's words, it's only your own words. How do I take notes? This is the heart and soul of today's class. I suggest there are 4 general preparatory activities. Preserving notes, skimming, reading. This is a preliminary activity. We haven't got to the real core of reading yet. I'll explain what I mean by that. Scanning, and I put speed reading in brackets. I'm going to say that first because I've just got a brief comment about speed reading, and then we're going to forget it. That's why there's just 4 activities. You may have taken courses in speed reading, you may have read about it. Generally speaking, for academic work, it's not recommended because speed reading may allow you to do certain things, but for deep understanding and knowledge, it's probably not very effective. Preserving notes. Recommendations vary here. You might like wire-bound booklets with sections for each course. You might like loose-leaf booklets where you put the paper in yourself. You might like one of these booklets where it's wire-bound and you can have sections not for each course, but for parts of a course. You know, section for your own notes, section for the notes from the lectures, own notes coming from texts. The choice is yours, but there should be some way of preserving your notes. When I was a student, I used to have a binder for each course, and I used the ring-type binder because you could move pages around if you wanted to. And from time to time, when you took your own notes, if you wanted, you could sort of integrate them with the lecture notes and then read them at the same time, which I thought was quite useful. Guess what I've got here. It looks pretty old, eh? Undergraduate lecture notes. Of course. There's a piece of paper sticking out here. I wonder why. Let's see. Lecture number 23, May the 17th, 1966. Gestalt theory, Wertheimer, figure and ground phenomena. Oh yeah, the Gestalt theorists. It's all in here still. Actually, it's legible too, amazingly. And that's an interesting date because that's 2 days before I saw Bob Dylan in Glasgow on his 1966 tour. Big day in my life. Here's my master's program in mathematical psychology at the University of Stirling, 1969. Look at all this stuff. Formulae, look at that. Pure mathematical formulae. Even in mathematics you take notes, right? Now I'm not boasting about my note-taking. I'm showing you my notes. And I never thought in a million years that I would, 40 years later, have this. But when I ended up in academia, I still had kept my notes because through graduate school I just kept them. And I have actually kept them. And once in a blue moon I do go back and have a look at them just to kind of see if there's something in the old notes that might be useful for the new ones. And my professors were pretty good. Most of the stuff in there is still very relevant today. So, single binder or sections for courses, booklet for each course, loose leaf binder, sections for text. You make your choice. But here's the tip. You heard it from me there. You should write down the date. Well, maybe I didn't. Yeah, I did say that. But you should number your notes. Believe me, it's particularly important if you use the loose leaf system. Oh, what happens when you drop your notes? Pages aren't numbered. Actually, you should use the running head thing, maybe at the top of the page, you know, class X, page 1, so that if you do lose place, you can put them back in order. Skimming and reading are the 2 major steps here in creating a framework. By skimming, we're talking about reading the text in a preliminary manner. What you should often do is read headings in a book. It could be the chapter, It could be the subheadings within the chapter, and then go to the opening sentence of each paragraph within the section. You're not really trying to read for knowledge, you're just trying to get what it's about, what we call the gist. If you get the gist, then you go back in a moment and you start reading. So this is what we mean by skimming. Main chapter, headings, subheadings, first sentence of each paragraph. The idea is so that you can say to yourself, I know what this is about. You don't actually know the details of what is being said yet because you haven't read it, but you know what it's going to be about. This is a way of setting up a framework so that when you do the reading, you've got a bit of a framework. And then you read. By the way, some textbooks are actually set up for this. It so happens in my intro class, David Meyer's textbook actually has learning objectives. You'll see learning objective number 1, and he actually has a little statement, so you know the next 3 pages is for that. And that's actually quite helpful for the student, I think, because you're not just reading, no idea where it's going, you know exactly what you're looking for. It doesn't apply in some other disciplines. Now you do the reading, but you're not actually reading for detail yet. What you're doing is this, you're reading to get the main ideas, and this is where you might use a highlighter, different colors, yellow, red, blue, whatever, and make notes in the margin. What you're doing is you're reading to get the big idea, and you remember when you were learning to read, you sometimes had a ruler. Remember that old when you were 5 years old and you were picking through? It's almost something like that. You've got your highlighter and you're going along looking for main ideas. I do it all the time. My books and my journal articles, they're covered in yellow and red and blue. And it's a good way of concentrating, keeping attention and picking out what's important. A quick scan through a paragraph or 2 like that gives you the main ideas, and now you go back and you read it. You read it slowly, you concentrate on the highlighted bits, and you are getting ready to take notes on this. So here's a summary about taking text notes. You should record the chapter title. You should record the chapter headings and subheadings. Make your notes in your own words, based on your highlighting and margin notes. I suggest using only one side of the page. You know, for example, for my notes for today's class, they're typed out and I've got some ideas here, but I don't use the other side because later when you go back, you might find you want to jot something on the back. My old lecture notes in here, I noticed I wrote on both sides. Had no money, so I had no choice. Now, I did say write in your own words, but there are cases, perhaps record definitions verbatim. That actually is useful, not because you want to memorize them in a rote manner, but very often definitions are so clear, crisp, and precise, and they capture meaning so well that word for word is a good idea. And sometimes in an exam, if you're asked for a definition, if you actually give it word for word, it's certainly to be correct. You won't be accused of plagiarism, I don't think, if it's on an exam. And if it's on an essay, well, you just put quotation marks. According to X, the definition of Y is, write it, quote it. So, don't forget the quotation marks if you are quoting. And when you are making your notes, don't forget to write down exactly where you found it. You should write down the page number that you are reading where you got the definition or quote from. First of all, if you want to find it again, you can do it more easily, but if you're going to cite it in an essay, you'll always be told, cite the author, cite where, and if it's a quotation in psychology at least, you're supposed to give the page number, the precise page number. I mean, can you imagine Tolstoy said, quote, you want to check it? How many pages do you have to search through to find that? There are 2 major note-taking systems. One is called the Cornell method. I'm going to describe it, then I'll show you an illustration. You draw a vertical line down the middle of the page, perhaps 25% on the left, 75% on the right. Horizontal line along the bottom, 80% on the top, 20% on the bottom. When you're making your notes from your textbook, you use that part on the right above the box. And after you've written your notes, you go back over them and you extract keywords and write them in the paragraph, on the part rather, on the left. And the summary is written at the bottom. So each page you have details on the right, little keywords on the left, or comments, or things that occur to you afterwards, and at the bottom you summarize the main ideas. So already you're taking effective notes and you're summarizing and you're learning. The other one is called concept mapping. Here, the idea is to represent your notes visually, so it's not so much words, you use diagrams. Visualization is often an effective tool. So you create a visual representation. See in a moment what I mean by the parts, but you link the parts with lines to show how things connect. And usually there's a central idea right at the center of the page or right at the top. Here's some examples. So this is what they mean by hierarchical diagram. Matter is at the very top. Here's the case where there's something with a major idea in the middle. So this would be from history or politics or something like that. And here's something on study skills. I don't know if you want me to share these PowerPoints at some point in some way. I don't know. We'll work that out if you want. But I can share these PowerPoints with you, and you can see this if you want to study it in more detail. But again, study skills are at the center, and here's note-taking as a sub-part of it. So note-taking suggestions. You should write down, of course, the main ideas, but also criticisms, questions, anything that comes as a reaction on your part. Points 2 and 3, you should personalize your notes. What that means is that you're reading them for you, so anything you can do, and you can decide yourself what's good for you. You can use color, you can use symbols, you can use pen, you can use pencil, you can use highlighter on your notes the same way as you did on the text, to try to make them stand out, be personal, make an impact on you. Make them look interesting. And this leads to another tip, the fourth one I've offered here specifically. Preserve an organized set. And actually I haven't said it so far, but it does help if you can read later what you wrote. So make them legible. Sometimes people say take clear notes, and I say, what do you mean by clear? Oh, well, what I mean is they're clear in the sense of meaning, but they're also clear in the sense that somebody can read them, and you're the one that's going to be reading them. Now to the lecture. This is where we are today. First reason, active learning again. It helps you to be active if you write while you're listening. It helps you to focus and concentrate, and counteracting boredom. Now, sometimes the odd lecture comes along that you find boring, and hopefully not too often at Bishop's, but it can happen. And what do you do when you're in the most boring lecture ever, besides fall asleep? Well, if you're taking notes, you're forcing yourself, because there's going to be something in there that you probably should know. And if you are bored, you should just say to yourself, okay, I've got to get the main points. If you don't take notes, for sure you'll miss them, because you'll have drifted off. But by taking notes, you're not going to drift off, because you have to write your notes. So heaven forbid that there's a boring lecture, but if it is that way, taking notes is helpful. Again, you have a record. And having a record for future study is good. But you see, there's a big difference between lecture and text. When you're taking notes from text, you have the original to go back to. But once the lecture is given, it's gone. Always record the date of the lecture. I did it there. Nobody told me to do that. I guess I just thought it was a good idea. It's good to record the date. There might be all kinds of reasons to go back for it. I mean, I had forgotten until yesterday that that was 2 days before the Bob Dylan show. And when I looked at that note, I thought, my gosh, I remember I was just jumping up and down. I was still in class, 2 days to go, can't wait. That was the day in Manchester, the 17th of May 1966. Someone in the audience shouted out at him, Judas! Because he picked up an electric guitar after being a folk singer. By the way, read the current edition of Rolling Stone, where Bob Dylan this month talks about that person who shouted Judas at him. Actually, I'll take the, you probably won't go out and read it, so I'll just tell you. He says, I hope they rot in hell. I'm surprised he would say that, actually. gosh, I guess it really got to him. Eh? He's 71 years of age now. He hopes they rot in hell. And because he believes that there is a place above this earth, and probably below, that is a serious quote from Dylan, because he has got beliefs. Anyway, record the date, record the lecture topic and title, that's helpful. And I don't mean record your location in the classroom, but you should be in a good place in the classroom so that you can see and hear. And it might not be a problem if the classroom is well designed. Now, some points about the lecture. This is what you're doing today, although you do have a special handout. If there's anything that's written on the blackboard, or the whiteboard, or in PowerPoints, and you're taking notes, get that down. Particularly if it's blackboard or whiteboard, because the person is talking and they're writing. What they write is going to be important. That's why they're writing it there. You should listen for cues from the professor about what's important or what is not important. There may be words such as, what I'm about to say is very important. And I've actually said it myself, and when I do that I usually stop and say, very important. Get it? You'll see it again sometime. But turning to the other point, or on the other hand, or it has been claimed that, but so-and-so disagrees. These are all key words to show you where the argument's going, so it keeps you alert to what you should be writing down. And there could be non-verbal cues as well, the hand waving and all that kind of thing. Pay attention to these things because it gives you cues. 4 points. You should record your key points in note form. There's no point in trying to write down everything that the person says unless you know shorthand. Shorthand is an activity that most people don't have anymore. Shorthand, you can write everything down as they say it. So you have to use abbreviations. I was half thinking of handing out a handout with abbreviations, but you better to make up your own. I'll show you one example in a moment. I have all my own abbreviations. Little shortened versions of words. In psychology, experiment for me is always just XPT, experiment. Just a quick way of jotting it down. Using abbreviations in taking notes will allow you to save some time. Listen for understanding. That's why your notes should be fairly brief, because you want to make sure you understand. And you'll find out an important point about this in a few minutes. I'm almost finished here, but there's a point about understanding while you listen and having cryptic short notes. Space out your notes for later elaboration. Don't just crush them all together like I did. You saw that mess of notes. If I'd known better, I would have made spaces. But maybe I wouldn't, because paper, it's expensive. So. I don't know. Anyway, today you don't have any problem with that. Now, here's an example of cryptic notes. Classical conditioning, this is psychology obviously, is learning that takes place when we come to associate two stimuli in the environment. One of these stimuli triggers a reflex response. The second stimulus is originally neutral with respect to that response. But after it is compared with the first stimulus, it comes to trigger the response in its own right. Ugh. Anyway, if you take intro psychology, we do lectures on this. It's called classical conditioning. But look, classical condition, learning, takes place, association, two stimuli. First stimulus triggers a response, rest. Second stimulus is originally neutral. That's all written, but paired with first triggers. See, there's an example of cryptic note-taking. So after class, what happens? Within 24 hours, I really mean this, within 24 hours, not 24 days, or 24 months, go over your notes. The ones you've taken in the classroom. And this is where the spacing comes in. Elaborate on them. For sure, there will be something the professor said that you didn't write down in your notes, that if you go over within 24 hours, your note will trigger that, and you'll say, oh yes, they went on about that at a bit more length. I still remember what that was, so then write it all out. If you remember they said something important and you haven't got it, you just put a question mark in your notes, say, I've got to follow up on that somehow. Speak to a friend, or go to the professor and say, there was a bit that you talked about, I didn't get it in my notes, could you just quickly tell me what it was? That's what office hours are for. It has been suggested that you actually rewrite your notes, especially if they're taken in cryptic form. At this point, you actually might want to write them out in longhand. This is a preference. I don't know if it's a recommendation. Some students feel that doing this gives them yet another practice trial. But always, 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 after the class, read your notes for understanding. Don't just kind of in a surface way skim over them and say, oh, yeah, I know that word, yeah. No, that's far too shallow. You've got to read as if you're reading a textbook for the first time. Read it. Say to yourself, do I know what that means? Again, there might be more reactions, questions, and suggestions. And this is where you coordinate your lecture and your text notes. And if you really are up for it, at the end of each week, put some time aside to do it again. So you take class 1 within 24 hours of review, etc. Then on Sunday, at the end of the week, you go back over all your notes for the week and look at them all once, go over, read, annotate. And then you're all set up for the next week. Final tip. You should take notes for your notes. This is more like preparing for an exam, I think. But it's a good way to end up, I think. So you've got your notes. Even if they're written out, they're in detail now. So you can have another clean set of notes where you're taking notes from the original notes. And then you take them, and then you take notes from your notes. And ad infinitum. And you might end up with the whole course like this. See? There we go. Developmental psychology. One year of mathematical psychology. Had this for the final exams. That's all I used. It was all here. Never went back to my notes, never went back to the books. Just read this over and over and over before the exams. So, there's your overhead. Why take notes? I'm not going to go over it with you. It just summarizes. A lot of the things I said here are on that overhead. Maybe some other things. But that is the summary. That is the justification for today's thesis. How can I help myself learn by taking good notes? Thank you.